In the summer of 1967, 300 meters beneath the turquoise surface of the Caribbean Sea, something fell from the sky. A Soviet nuclear submarine, crippled and sinking, descended into darkness, carrying secrets that could shift the balance of the entire Cold War. What happened next would become one of the most audacious covert operations ever conceived. Hidden from the world, hidden from the Soviets, and hidden from Congress itself. This is the story of Operation Silent Reef, the mission that never officially existed. By 1967, the Cold War had reached a dangerous equilibrium. The United States and Soviet Union stood locked in a technological arms race, each side desperate to understand the other's capabilities, weaknesses, and intentions. The ocean had become the new battlefield. Soviet submarines prowled the Atlantic with impunity. They were faster, deeper, and more sophisticated than Western intelligence had predicted. Every few months, a new Soviet vessel would materialize off the American coast, then vanish again into the abyss. Pentagon strategists couldn't sleep. They needed answers. The intelligence community was fractured. The Navy believed they understood Soviet submarine technology. The CIA disagreed. The Pentagon wanted military solutions. The CIA wanted secrets. And above it all, President Johnson's administration was fixated on Vietnam, leaving little attention for what many considered an academic debate about underwater warfare. But in June of that year, everything changed. A Soviet Gulf-class ballistic missile submarine, designated K-156 by NATO, was transiting the Caribbean during a routine deployment. Its mission? To project Soviet naval power in America's backyard. What happened next remains classified to this day. The official story: the submarine experienced mechanical failure and sank in international waters. The truth was far more complicated. Within hours of the submarine's disappearance, American SOSUS arrays, an underwater detection network spanning the Atlantic, pinged the event. Hydrophones picked up the characteristic sound of a ballistic missile submarine dying. The implosion, the debris field settling on the ocean floor, the silence that follows. The CIA's Director of Science and Technology, a brilliant but ruthless operative named Dr. Richard Helms, understood immediately what had just happened. Somewhere on the Caribbean seabed lay a Soviet ballistic missile submarine, intact enough to be salvageable. Aboard that submarine were codebooks, cryptographic materials, missile guidance systems, and something far more valuable, the operational logs of Soviet Submarine Command. It was intelligence gold. But there was a problem. The Soviets knew the submarine was down there too, and they were watching. The CIA had approximately 72 hours before the Soviet Navy would mobilize a recovery operation of their own. They couldn't allow Moscow to retrieve their own vessel first. That would be catastrophic for American intelligence. They also couldn't announce that an American intelligence operation was underway. The public, Congress, and even most of the Pentagon couldn't know. So the CIA did what the CIA does best. They lied, compartmentalized, and created an elaborate fiction. The cover story was simple and brilliant. A private American mining corporation called Glomar Recovery Services had discovered a Soviet vessel on the seabed during routine oceanic surveys. The CEO was a retired Navy engineer with perfect credentials. The company headquarters existed, though it was empty. The operation had one vessel, hastily chartered and retrofitted, the research vessel Constellation, a deep ocean drilling ship with a massive derrick crane mounted on its stern. To anyone watching, and the Soviets absolutely were watching, it looked like a commercial salvage operation, nothing more. The real mission parameters were classified so aggressively that even Navy personnel assigned to the operation didn't know they were participating in espionage. They thought they were part of a salvage job, a cover-up within a cover-up. By July 15th, the Constellation had moved into position above the wreck site. The water was 900 meters deep. The submarine lay in absolute darkness, crushing pressure surrounding it on all sides. Retrieving anything from that depth had never been attempted in human history. The technology to do it had to be invented from scratch. The CIA contracted with Lockheed Skunk Works, the legendary aerospace division that built the U-2 and SR-71 spy planes, to design a recovery system. What they came up with was extraordinary. A massive underwater claw mechanism, suspended by cable, controlled from the surface ship, robotic arms that could manipulate objects in the darkness, guidance systems using acoustic sonar and pioneering computer algorithms. The operation required precision engineering that wouldn't be publicly acknowledged for another 15 years. For 6 weeks, the Constellation remained on station. Above the ship, a false convoy of support vessels came and went, decoys designed to confuse Soviet satellites passing overhead. Below the surface, in the crushing darkness of the Caribbean deep, American technology reached down and touched a sunken Soviet warship for the first time in recorded history. The recovery crane descended slowly through the water column. Each meter brought new challenges. The pressure increased exponentially. The water temperature dropped. In the murk and cold, the robotic arms extended toward their target, the conning tower of the K-156, now a tomb. Operators aboard the Constellation worked 12-hour shifts, monitoring sonar displays and crude video feeds from cameras mounted on the recovery grapple. They were piloting a machine through absolute darkness, hundreds of meters away, controlling it with millisecond delays in signal transmission. A single mistake would lose everything. Equipment failure would alert the Soviets. Detection would trigger an international crisis. The stakes had never been higher for a covert operation. The first phase was extraction. The crane grapple locked onto the conning tower, the highest point of the submarine jutting upward through the sediment. Hydraulic pressure built as the winch began to turn. Slowly, impossibly, the first section of wreckage broke free from the seafloor. But the strain was enormous. The cables screamed under the tension. The equipment was operating at the absolute limit of its design specifications. One operator aboard the Constellation later described it as watching a machine that wasn't supposed to exist try to do something that shouldn't be possible. Then disaster struck. As the conning tower section reached midway through the water column, the stress on the main cable exceeded projections. The cable fractured. Thousands of meters of reinforced steel snapped like thread. The entire section of the submarine, the most valuable intelligence asset in the operation, plummeted back to the seabed, slamming into the wreck with enough force to collapse several compartments. The operation room aboard the Constellation went silent. Officers stared at dead instruments. The mission parameters had just fundamentally changed. The primary objective, intact recovery of the bridge and upper sections, was now impossible. But the CIA had contingencies. They always did. What nobody expected was what happened next. Within 48 hours, Soviet naval vessels appeared on the horizon. A Soviet surface ship positioned itself near the Constellation, ostensibly for scientific research. It was a bluff. The Soviets suspected something was happening, but they couldn't prove it without starting an international incident. The Americans couldn't acknowledge what they were doing without admitting espionage in international waters. It had become a game of poker, played with naval warships and nuclear stakes.
Excellent for creating natural, expressive documentary-style voice. The CIA made a decision. They would accelerate the secondary mission. Instead of continuing attempts at full hull recovery, teams would conduct what was called selective salvage, retrieving the most valuable compartments and materials without raising the entire vessel. Specialized deep-sea divers, trained for operations at depths that would kill ordinary men, suited up in experimental pressure suits. They descended into the darkness toward the wreck. Their mission: penetrate the submarine hull, locate the cipher machines, codebooks, and naval communications equipment and extract them piece by piece. It was dangerous beyond measure. The depths were lethal. The submarine's hull was twisted and unstable. One mistake meant being crushed or drowning in a metal tomb. But over the next 4 weeks, an estimated 40% of the most sensitive materials were recovered. Operation Silent Reef officially ended on September 12, 1967. The Constellation weighed anchor and sailed out of the Caribbean. The cover story had held. Soviet intelligence agencies suspected American involvement but had no proof. The American public knew nothing. Congress knew nothing. The recovered materials were rushed to CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. Crypto analysts worked around the clock. What they discovered changed American military strategy in ways that remained classified for decades. The Soviet submarine carried operational procedures that revealed critical vulnerabilities in their naval command structure. The cipher materials provided partial insights into Soviet communications protocols. The missile guidance documentation gave American weapons designers a roadmap of Soviet targeting capabilities, and more importantly, their limitations. Within 6 months, American submarine commanders had been briefed on the recovered intelligence. Strategic doctrine shifted, defense spending priorities changed. The entire trajectory of undersea warfare was altered by secrets pulled from the darkness of the Caribbean. But the operation also had unintended consequences. The Soviets never officially acknowledged losing the K-156. No Soviet ships went to investigate the wreck. No recovery missions were launched. For decades, the submarine's fate remained a mystery within Soviet command structures. This silence created paranoia and mistrust within the Soviet military establishment. Suspicion that the Americans had recovered something, yet inability to verify what. Later, when word of the operation eventually leaked to the press in the 1970s, it sparked international outrage. Environmental groups protested. The United Nations raised questions about salvaging military vessels in international waters. Diplomatic tensions spiked. But by then, the intelligence windfall had already transformed American military capability. The operation had paid for itself 1,000 times over. Operation Silent Reef remains classified. The exact amount of material recovered, the specific intelligence products derived, and the full scope of impact on American military planning have never been publicly disclosed. Some documents were declassified in the early 2000s, but massive redactions hide the core operational details. What we do know is this: it represented a high watermark of Cold War intelligence operations, a moment when American ingenuity, audacity, and willingness to operate in the shadows of international law created a strategic advantage that the Soviet Union could never quite understand or counter. The Caribbean is warm and beautiful. Tourists swim in those waters every day, unaware that 60 years ago, in the depths below, a Cold War secret was extracted from the darkness. Unaware that American divers descended into the abyss to steal the technical specifications of Soviet power. Operation Silent Reef reminds us that the Cold War was not fought only in boardrooms or on missile fields. It was fought in the depths of oceans, in the silence of encrypted messages, in the careful calculation of strategic advantage measured in fractions of kilometers and milliseconds of detection time. The submarine still rests on the Caribbean floor. Whether it has been disturbed since 1967 remains unknown. The intelligence it revealed has influenced military doctrine for generations. The techniques pioneered during its recovery enabled underwater operations that defined the next 50 years of naval warfare. Today, we navigate a world transformed by that summer operation, where ocean surveillance is ubiquitous, where deep-sea technology is routine, where the line between espionage and national security is drawn differently than it was in 1967. But the fundamental truth remains unchanged. In the quiet depths, away from public view,
nations still pursue secrets that could shift the balance of power. Operation Silent Reef didn't end the Cold War. It prolonged it, deepened it, and gave both superpowers tools they never quite admitted to possessing. The reef remains silent. The secrets it guards stay hidden in the darkness, where they may yet belong.